Today, we're investigating a few Mario games that may or may not have ever existed. We'll either prove or debunk each game's existence, thanks to new and exclusive info for some of them, and clear up their dubious origins. We're covering 4 Mario games for the 64DD, a Donkey Kong game for Philips CDI, another DK title for arcades, and an alleged Yoshi adventure from the creators of Star Fox. That last one might have played a part in one of Nintendo's biggest games ever. Before we show you all the evidence debunking or supporting each game's existence, we'll give you all a few seconds to try and predict whether the rumor was true or just an internet fib. So without further ado, let's dive into proving/debunking our first rumor: the 4 cancelled 64DD Mario games. Fans of Nintendo history are no doubt familiar with the 64DD, the Japanese exclusive expansion for the N64. Although first unveiled in 1995, the add-on didn't hit store shelves until December '99, mainly due to long delays attributed to the N64's poor sales. This led to many 64DD games being cancelled or transitioning to the standard N64 cartridge format. Among these were several titles in the Mario Artist series. As the story goes, 7 Mario Artist games were announced, but 4 were cancelled due to the 64DD being branded a failure. These were Mario Artist Game Maker, Graphical Message Maker, Sound Maker, and Video Jockey Maker. So are the rumors true? Are we missing not 1 but 4 Mario games for the 64DD? Nope. Wikipedia, Mario Wiki, and other sites say Nintendo announced 8 Mario Artist titles. We've even messed up and said it ourselves in the past. Thankfully, Wikipedia has some very reliable sourcing. Notice how SoundMaker has more sources than the others. We'll get into that in a minute. The 2 consistent sources are reports from IGN dated August 26, 1999. We'll read one of these reports verbatim, as the way it's written hints at what's happening here. Listen carefully. Quote, IGN 64 has learned that Nintendo is planning to greatly expand its lineup of creativity software for the upcoming 64DD attachment. In addition to 4 titles in the Mario Artist series, Polygon Maker, Talent Studio, Paint Studio, and the as-of-yet unseen Sound Maker, Nintendo is in the works with at least 3 other Maker titles. The article goes on to describe the remaining games. Video Jockey Maker is some sort of video creator, giving players the chance to be a virtual VJ and edit music videos. Graphical Message Maker is presumably some writing tool, possibly for making greeting cards and banners. Game Maker is, well, exactly what the name implies. While it may not be immediately apparent, IGN specifically states that although these are real games being made, they're not classified under Mario Artist. These were similar games by RandNet, who ran the online service for the 64DD. The confusion arose as both RandNet and Nintendo were working on 64DD games called Sound Maker. RandNet had 4 games in development: Game, Graphical Message, Video Jockey, and Sound Maker, all of which went unreleased. Nintendo, meanwhile, had Paint, Talent, Polygon, and Sound Studio, the last of which was scrapped. Nintendo's games were first labeled as Makers, but eventually adopted the Studio title following RandNet's announcement. For the sake of clarity, let's refer to Nintendo's game as Sound Studio, even though it was seemingly cancelled before the name change. The Japanese exclusive Mario Artist games began weirdly enough in Europe. Software Creations, a Manchester-based studio, had a long relationship with Nintendo, developing numerous titles for the NES and Super Nintendo. In February 1995, they signed on to Nintendo's Dream Team. This was a short list of non-Japanese developers who'd all pledged to make Nintendo 64 games. Among their projects was an all-in-one music and graphics studio for the N64. One of Software Creations' lead designers, John Pickford, was assigned lead. Pickford pitched a concept nicknamed Creator, where users could mess around with creatures in a 3D world, editing the model's textures and modifying the parameters of entities. A dinosaur, for example, could be recolored pink, or edited to move as fast as a cheetah. As for the music portion, a simple building block editor was created, similar to the one in Mario Paint. Creator was first unveiled at Space World 1995, and was met with great critical reception. Software Creations was happy with the game, as was Nintendo of America, but NCL in Japan seemed hesitant. They didn't see enough game-like qualities to entice players. Consequently, American producers were brought in to help steer the ship. What started as a spiritual successor to Mario Paint was now an official sequel, codenamed Mario Paint 64. Pickford had left the team by this point, and the game was slowly transitioning from the base N64 to the 64DD. many aspects of the game were cut, including minigames, and even worse, the sound editor. Were it to remain in the game, Mario Artist 64 would be released as two separate games, Mario Artist Paint Studio and Sound Studio. Much to Creation's chagrin, Sound Studio was scrapped, and only Paint Studio made it to store shelves. Two more Mario Artists would be released in the following months, all with no involvement from the original team. Very little is known about RandNet's Soundmaker or the other three games they were making. We don't know how far they got in development, or why they were even scrapped in the first place. What we do know, however, is that they had no connection to the Mario Artist games. Just a coincidence of names is all. But enough about the N64 for now. Let's move on to the console with the best Nintendo games, the Philips CDI. As many of you may know, Nintendo partnered with Philips after a falling out with Sony over the ill-fated SNES CD-ROM. As part of its alliance, the Dutch hardware company got a deal to license several classic Nintendo characters, leading to mixed results. Trade ads from the time showed the biggest names in entertainment exiting a limousine. Mario with Hotel Mario, Link with the Faces of Evil, Princess Zelda with the Wand of Gamelon and Zelda's Adventure, and Donkey Kong with, nothing. Look at him wave. So naive. But this raised the question, was there supposed to be a DK game for the CDI? Did we actually miss out on a Donkey Kong game from the producers of Hotel Mario? Apparently yes. For years, the only information we had about Donkey Kong on the CDI came from one source, not a magazine or an interview, but a resume. Adrian Jackson Jones, now a self-proclaimed stay-at-home dad, was a veteran programmer, working on franchises like Medal of Honor and Call of Duty. His first job in the industry was at RSP in the early 90s, working on games for the SNES and, you guessed it, Philips CDI. Per his LinkedIn, Super Nintendo and CDI programmer, RSP 1992 to 1993. Among other things, designed and implemented the game engine for the CDI system game Donkey Kong. Rydell Software Productions was founded in 1986 in Garden City, New York. It was founded by one Michael J. Rydell, a designer, programmer, and artist who created many early titles by himself. RSP worked with major licenses like Sesame Street, The Walt Disney Company, and Mad Magazine. Spy vs. Spy, a solo Rydell game, specifically put RSP on the map. By November 1991, RSP had relocated to Tucson, Arizona, and grew to about 25 people. In September 1992, they signed an agreement with Philips to design and develop a new game based on Nintendo's arcade hit Donkey Kong. Here's where things get somewhat iffy. We know that DK was planned for the CDI, but it's hard to nail down what the game would have looked like. Websites like the Lost Media Wiki claim it would have been a continuation of the arcade games, citing an EGM gossip column from June 1993. That Donkey Kong follow-up we told you about so many moons ago has been placed on the Philips CDI and should be finished sometime next year. This was in response to a rumor the previous year claiming Nintendo was working on a remake, not a sequel. Remember, Donkey Kong Country didn't come out until 1994, so the arcade games were all anyone had to go on. This alleged remake, replete with new scenes and better graphics, was planned to release by the end of 1992. This rumor emerged after Nintendo's deal with Philips, but before RSP signed on as a developer. Also, the fine print said this remake was planned for the SNES, not the CDI. So if this February 92 rumor is true, and that's a large if, it would have been a different, unrelated title. The sequel rumor from June 93, however, still stands. Jackson Jones' resume implies that at most, a rudimentary game engine was made. Following an investigation by writer John Chapaniak, neither Jackson Jones nor Rydell could recall much beyond what was already shared. Factors like the passage of time, RSP's poor preservation habits, and in Jackson Jones's case memory problems turned the game into somewhat of a fuzz. Although not explicitly mentioned, the lack of remembrance within RSP could also indicate a brief development. We contacted several ex-RSP employees to learn more about Donkey Kong's production. Those who replied had little if any memory of the game. However, one person did manage to give a slither of new info. This person, who will remain anonymous, worked in the art department at RSP, essentially acting as lead animator on Donkey Kong for the CDI. In their words, "We had a small team. The game was a branching side-scroller in the vein of Donkey Kong Country. We didn't get out of the storyboarding phase before the CDI team went away. Philips was a mess of a publisher, populated by many people who had never made games. The limitation of the tech made a branching game kind of impractical. The controller wasn't great either. Any assets and demos we put together are long gone." Jackson Jones corroborates these claims, recalling that the biggest difficulty during development was the CDI's memory, which was circumvented by only loading assets visible on screen, thus making a branching platform virtually impossible. This, however, proves it was more of a predecessor to Donkey Kong Country than a sequel to the arcade game. EGM's claim that it would be ready by '94 is also false, as it had died in pre-production before June 1993. So in short, yes, there was a Donkey Kong game in development for the CDI, but it never got very far. At least we can rest easy knowing no goofy cutscenes were lost to time. On the subject of Donkey Kong and the CDI, let's move on to the next rumor. This is a strange one. In 2016, Game Informer published an interview with Steven Radosh, executive producer of Hotel Mario and the Zelda CDI games. Radosh himself is a fascinating figure, having previously worked for Atari and Sega, as well as a brief detour in television. Before his time at Philips, Radosh had a run-in with Nintendo, amusingly while at Sega in the early 80s. To quote Radosh in Game Informer, "Somehow Sega had gotten the rights to Donkey Kong. Apparently he developed an arcade game for Sega where players controlled DK as a parking attendant. You were dodging cars that were pulling in and out of the lot, and you had to get X number of cars parked in spaces." Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. First and foremost, Donkey Kong as a parking attendant? It sounds outlandish, but then again, the original trilogy featured construction workers, zookeepers, and florists, so in a way it kinda makes sense. But why Sega? Is it true that for a brief period in the early 80s, Nintendo's future competitor owned the rights to, or had a license to, their Smash arcade hit? Of course not. Sega's rivalry with Nintendo wasn't as fierce as it would be a decade later, but still, no company would hand away the development rights to their best-selling franchise so haphazardly. Radosh did work at Sega in the early 80s, and upon research did work on a parking attendant game, but it had nothing to do with Donkey Kong. Bear with us for a second as we step back and look at the history. In 1970, Sega, freshly entering the US arcade market, was sold to the American conglomerate Gulf and Western. 4 years prior, G&W had purchased Paramount Pictures. As an attempt at cross-media, Sega developed a few games based on Paramount's properties throughout the 70s and 80s. Some games, like the vector title Star Trek, were produced by their subsidiaries Sega/Gremlin, eventually renamed Sega Electronics. In early 1983, Sega established an advanced R&D group, trying to find out what tech to invest in for the future. It was based out of the Paramount lot in Los Angeles. This group, which included some former Sega Electronics staff, was where a young Steven Radosh worked. Despite pitching several arcade games to Bally, the group at Paramount never had a released title. A leaked prototype of the 1985 game Turbo Tag is currently all we have. However, looking at interviews with former employees, we can get an idea of what else they had planned. According to a 2008 interview with programmer Tom Sloper, Sega Electronics was in the process of developing a sequel to Congo Bongo. For those unaware, Congo Bongo was basically Sega's answer to Donkey Kong. You play as a hunter fighting against an ape called Bongo. Your goal is to climb up the stage, avoiding obstacles thrown by Bongo, and make it to the top. It's still very much its own thing, but the similarities are apparent. So what would the sequel to Congo Bongo be? In the words of Sloper, "I was assigned to write a design for Congo Bongo 2, but Jeff Rockless didn't like it. He wanted the game to take place on amusement park rides, and I wanted it to take place in a lost jungle where prehistoric creatures still lived." Sloper's treatment, dubbed The Revenge of Congo Bongo, was rejected by CEO Jeff Rockless. Rockless, a former Disney Imagineer, envisioned a game set within a theme park. Designer Sam Palahniuk subsequently wrote a new treatment, and development was underway before the industry crash of 1983 forced its cancellation. This scrapped sequel is likely what Radosh referred to in his Game Informer interview. It wasn't a Donkey Kong parking game. It was a Congo Bongo theme park game. Radosh was a designer on Turbo Tag alongside Palahniuk, so it wouldn't be surprising if he had input here as well. Whatever the case is, rest assured that Donkey Kong was not involved whatsoever. And now for the big one. Did you know that apparently Argonaut Software, the British developers behind Star Fox, tried pitching a Yoshi game to Nintendo? There's a good chance you do, as it's without a doubt one of the most infamous rumors we've ever covered. As the story goes, in 1994, Argonaut pitched a 3D platform/racing game for Super Nintendo. They called it Yoshi Racing, and it would have used the same Super FX technology seen in Star Fox and Stunt Race FX. Founder Jez San sent a demo to Nintendo hoping for approval, but much to his dismay, they turned it down. Along with the recent cancellation of Star Fox 2, this response played a heavy part in Argonaut's departure from the company. 2 years later, Nintendo would come out with a 3D platformer of their own. A little game, you might have heard of it, called Super Mario 64. In a 2014 interview with Eurogamer, San alleged that Nintendo stole the concept from Argonaut, claiming that Shigeru Miyamoto later thanked him for the idea at a trade show. So, are the rumors true? Yes and no. Argonaut did indeed pitch a Yoshi game, but it wasn't anything playable, and the odds of Nintendo stealing the 3D platformer idea from Argonaut are pretty low. An important detail of this story is that following Nintendo's rejection, Yoshi Racing paved the way for another Argonaut title, Croc, Legend of the Gobos. Some websites claim that Croc's design, loosely resembling a green dinosaur, was made out of spite against Nintendo, but several reports refuse this. Jez San claims it was more of an if it ain't broke don't fix it situation. Argonaut obviously couldn't pitch a Yoshi game to another studio, so they had to redesign a new character from scratch. However, to save time, the model dynamics remained the same. We spoke to a former member of Argonaut who was able to confirm this, claiming that San's plan ultimately set limitations on character design. Junior artists were put in charge, with Simon Keating, formerly a member of Argonaut's IT department, submitting the final draft. By the way, according to one developer, who we decided to keep anonymous, the pitch was called Yoshi Racers, not Yoshi Racing as San often calls it in interviews. We'll refer to it as Yoshi Racers for the remainder of this video. In an interview for the book The Minds Behind Adventure Games, Croc's lead designer, Nick Cusworth, goes more in depth on his side of the story. In 1994, as the studio was finishing up work on a game called Creature Shock, an animator at Argonaut created 2 test animations of different colored Yoshis racing through an obstacle course. It wasn't anything playable, nor was it running on an actual SNES. It was merely some looping animations on a PC. Nevertheless, it was stunning. No one had even begun to tackle what a 3D animated platform game would look like. We had a bunch of discussions about it and using the Super FX chip and how it would even be possible. The polygon camera on those chips was so limited that it would be next to impossible. But for someone to imagine what a 3D platform game and a 3D Mario game would look like, it was pretty amazing. Cusworth is unsure what happened next, as Jez San went to Nintendo alone to pitch the idea. Now then, is it true that Nintendo stole the idea? Let's go back to that Eurogamer interview. San claims that Yoshi Racers was essentially the world's first 3D platform game, and a big risk for Argonaut, as Nintendo had never let an outside company use their IP before. We can sit here debating the historical inaccuracies of that statement all day, but we won't. What we're here for is what he says right after. Miyamoto-san went on to make Mario 64, which had the look and feel of our Yoshi game, but with the Mario character, of course. He came up to me at a show afterwards and apologized for not doing the Yoshi game with us, and thanked us for the idea to do a 3D platform game. He also said that we would make enough royalties from our existing deal to make up for it. That felt hollow to me. There are several reasons to question the validity of this claim. In other interviews, minor details change. Sometimes Miyamoto talks to San at a trade show, other times it's at a train station. Interestingly, looking at articles from the time of Croc's development, San tells almost the exact opposite story. In the October 1997 issue of Sega Saturn magazine, he states that Nintendo liked Argonaut's pitch, but turned it down because they had something similar in development. He said, "A year and a half later, they launched Mario 64. It's possible that the visuals we showed them gave them some ideas about how it might look, but on the other hand, it could have been a total coincidence." A common theme throughout today's video is that memory isn't always the best resource. It can be fickle depending on the person, their position, and the amount of time that's passed. We'll never truly know if San's interaction with Miyamoto was true, but looking at the evidence, it's clear there is at least some bias attached, likely from the bitter split-off between Argonaut and Nintendo. We know from the Nintendo Giga leak that the earliest versions of Mario 64 were done in September 1994. Using the information from Sega Saturn magazine, we can place Yoshi Racers around late that year. On the subject of the Giga leak, when news of the breach started making its way online, one of the most viral finds was this: a colorless model of Yoshi buried next to a few other models from Super FX games. The internet quickly put 2 and 2 together, declaring this the first known asset from a previously lost Yoshi Racers. In reality, however, it was completely unrelated. Again, what existed of Yoshi Racers never existed on the SNES. Looking at the file path and the surrounding models, this is likely a test done by Yoshiaki Koizumi, who worked on a 3D modeler on several Super FX projects. That should probably answer everything. Yoshi Racing was real, but it didn't inspire Nintendo to make a 3D platformer, and the models from the Giga have nothing to do with Argonaut. However, one question still stands. Who made the demo? Unfortunately, as of the writing of this video, that's still a mystery. In interviews, both San and Cusworth remember the creator to be a man named Marcus Morgan. Looking at his Moby Games, Morgan only has a few credits, one of which being a special thanks on Croc. It took a little bit of internet sleuthing, but we managed to track down Morgan and shoot him a message. He replied days later saying he remembered the demo but was not the artist who made it, and unfortunately he couldn't recall who the actual creator was. We asked several ex-Argonaut staff around the same time, but those who responded didn't know either. The case is still open, but we have our hopes up. We'll find the culprit sooner or later. When we do, you'll be the first to hear about it. Did you also know that a Zelda game supporting Super FX was in the works? Or that Argonaut's Star Fox 2 was nearly stolen at a trade show? For the full stories, click the videos on screen. Special thanks to Ethan Johnson, LuigiBlood, and Marcus Morgan. And thank you for watching. If you liked this video, feel free to like and subscribe for more facts from DidYouKnowGaming. Until next time, see ya!